Hi, my name is Martin Mayorga from Mayorga Coffee. I'm on the Culture Matters podcast.
Hi, Martin. Good morning or good afternoon. Or you told me you gave away where you're from. Not where you're from yet. I don't know that yet. But you say you're a proud Latino and you're in Miami at this moment.
I
So
am. I think my background with the water maybe gives that away a little bit, but
could
yeah,
be a harbor of any.
it could.
I've been looking, but I can't see. No, I didn't see anything particularly that I would recognize. So first question is introduce yourself a little bit to the audience. Where do you come from? Where are you now? Miami, we know that. And tell us a little bit about yourself and what is your cultural frame of reference, so to speak?
Well, I was born in Guatemala. I grew
Hmm.
up in Nicaragua. From there, through revolution, we left and went to Costa Rica, then Peru, then Miami, and then I ended up going to the Washington D.C. area where I finished high school and went to college and started a business now known as Mayorga Coffee. Um, So I basically say I'm from Latin America because it's tough to pin down where I'm truly from, right? I was born in Guatemala to Nicaraguan father, Peruvian mother, but I really did most of my early upbringing in Nicaragua. I grew up in Nicaragua till the revolution, but then obviously I quickly became very Americanized. So my cultural reference is really just Latino, right? I'm very, immersed in all things Latin America and grew up with the food, the everything about the Latin American culture, and then I assimilated that into a very Americanized Martin Mayorga.
Okay, where did you go to college? You said in Latin America or in the US?
No, I went to college in Georgetown. I studied finance there.
Okay, entonces
Yeah.
hablas español también.
Sí, sí, totalmente. Y ahorita vivo
Totalmente.
en Costa Rica. I live
Okay,
in Costa Rica today.
okay. It's an English podcast, so we won't continue in
Okay,
Spanish.
you got it.
And out of my own curiosity, because Guatemala is one of my favorite Latin American countries, next to Colombia. Where in Guatemala were you born?
So I was born in Zona 14, Zone 14,
Ah,
because
oh,
Guatemala City is in zones. And we left in 1975 during the massive earthquake.
yeah.
We were a family of six, and we slept in the car after the earthquake for about a week and a half. And my
Wow.
dad said, "This is not sustainable," and we just went to Nicaragua, where he was from.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting background. So if and I'm looking at the other screen here,
Mhm.
adapting to the U.S. culture. I mean, you said you grew up predominantly in Nicaragua,
Mhm.
and how was adapting to U.S. culture? How did that work for you?
Well, frankly, it wasn't easy because you're talking about the 1980s. I think cultural awareness was not where it is today,
Uh-huh.
specifically on Latinos, and it was challenging being a young boy coming to the U.S. In the Maryland area, where
Can I ask how old you were
12 by the time I moved to
at that
Maryland.
time? Okay.
Yeah. So frankly, it was a little, tense where I got picked on for not speaking English well. There's some altercations here and there.
Yeah.
And, people would come to the house and it smelled bad to them because we are cooking, my mom was cooking
Uh-huh.
lomo saltado or different Latin American foods. So I felt very different and not easy to assimilate because it was me and one other kid from Ecuador in my grade.
Hmm.
It wasn't as diverse as it is today. And I also felt pressure from my dad, who said I had to be Americanized. He taught me how to speak without an accent, which in today's world, you can look at that. Some people would see that as problematic. He was trying to help me really, not be kind of discriminated against or kind of have people assume things of me because, if you speak with an accent, there are people who are ignorant enough to think that makes you not intelligent, right? So,
Yeah.
um, I think his intentions were good, which is basically like become American and do it fast, and I
Okay.
did that.
How do you do that? I mean, it's still what I know. If I look only at the Latin America in general, there's still there's animosity. towards the Americans, typically what's going on right now. And by the way, we're recording this on what's the day? March 18, 2025. So how do you adapt to that?
First of all, from my perspective, I've never been in a scenario where there's animosity towards Americans. I think there could be resentment towards policy and resentment towards
Right.
blanket treatment of communities that are all treated the same, even though we're all very different. Um, I think ultimately for me, it was education at first, which I was terrible at. I was a terrible student. But for my dad's recommendation, which I did take on, was reading. I read a lot. I mean, I was reading constantly. I read everything from Plato to, I mean, I just would read and read and read
Mhm.
to enhance my vocabulary.
Okay.
Um, and I think that helped me just become assimilated linguistically, at least. And then it was social, right? I was a great baseball player. So that was my way to connect with other young kids my age. I played in all kinds of summer leagues. So that was also a great way to really assimilate into community.
Good. And so you have quite a mix in terms of your experience in Latin America as well. Your dad is
Oh,
from
yeah.
Peru, you said. Your mom is from Nicaragua or Costa
My
Rica.
dad was from Nicaragua. He passed away in '09. My mom is from Peru. Uh,
And
and we
you
lived in
were born
Guatemala.
in
Guatemala.
Guatemala. What can you enlighten us because I want to talk about your coffee in a moment. But what in your view and in your personal experience, also now having an outside look, outside looking in, what are the differences, if you want, main differences between if a couple of these Latin American countries, these big Latin American countries?
Well, I think when you look at a country like, especially Guatemala, right? I think it's something like 90% indigenous
Yeah,
and 10% non-indigenous. So white, Spanish descent. And it's frankly controlled by the minority, which
yeah.
is a recipe for tension. So I think there was a unspoken tension in Guatemala, especially if you got into more remote areas and maybe
Hmm.
the lighter skinned you were, there's that felt tension. You feel that a little bit in Peru as well when you go outside of Lima.
Hmm.
Um, at the end of the day, I think there's a general warmth from the people, but I think that uh, tension is also historical, right? I think a lot of these countries were colonized and
Hmm.
kind of
All of them, really. I mean,
right, pretty
you speak
much,
Spanish
yeah,
for a reason, right?
exactly. Mayorga is a name from Spain. I mean, my
Yeah.
dad. So my official last name was Mayorga Cortés.
Hmm.
Uh, there was a lot of Corteses in Latin America because of Hernan Cortés. My dad removed it from our last name because he didn't
Okay.
want to be defined
Okay.
by that. So I think there's so many similarities, but also so many differences. I think when you get more indigenous, there's a lot more humility and sometimes a little more tension.
Hmm.
Uh, I think ultimately they're all beautiful countries with delicious food. I mean, that's what I really missed when I was here young, and you didn't find a Peruvian restaurant or
The
so.
ceviche. Yeah.
Yeah, a great ceviche or tamales or whatever. Now it's a lot more kind of mainstream. But I think ultimately we have more similarities and differences, but we do have very distinctive differences that unfortunately I don't think companies and brands want to recognize. Everybody's kind of Mexican to a lot of big brands.
Okay. All right. Is there any Latin American country where it turns out or has grown more homogeneous?
Well, I live in Costa Rica right now, and I have to say it seems very
I
uh
mean, the indigenous and if you want the non-indigenous.
oh, unfortunately I think it's the opposite where I think the indigenous is fading off. And I think if you think about maybe Bolivia, uh
Uh-huh.
there's a little balance, but it's also geographically segmented, right? So like
Mm.
even Peru. In Peru, Lima's very Spanish descent,
Yeah.
but the country overall is very indigenous. It's just remote, right? Lima is, and it's so bad that like coffee can be grown and picked an 11-hour drive away. They bring it in the parchment and process it in Lima because there's no trust to
Mhm.
build facilities in the indigenous communities. So
Mm.
there's this unspoken, and I'm not saying 100%, but by and large, most coffee milling and exporting happens by the port. So they're
Okay.
willing to bring waste from the indigenous communities to the developed city, quote unquote, to avoid having to be operating in the indigenous communities.
Okay.
So there's some inherent issues internally in our countries as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Your coffee brand, what's it called again?
It's Mayorga Coffee. It's my last name. I
Mayorga
figured
Coffee.
that's
Uh-huh.
one way to prove that I believe in something is to put my name on it.
Okay, explain to me. I wrote down. I don't prepare a lot for these podcast interviews. It's show us the mug again because
Oh,
so that's it. Mayorga
that's it.
coffee. That's
Mayorga
it.
coffee.
Very cool.
Straightforward.
Um, so I don't prepare a lot for these podcasts, but there's one thing I wrote down: coffee and culture.
Hmm.
Tell me more. I mean, you're here. You're a coffee grower, exporter. So why are you here on this Culture Matters podcast?
Because I think that culture has been stripped away from coffee somewhat purposely over the last
Hmm.
hundreds of years. And I think it's done so because there has been an inherent assumption that an ethnic product is not necessarily a artisanal or specialty product.
Okay.
And I felt the need, beyond the need to do the right thing for producers and for communities in Latin America, I felt the need to represent our cultures in a positive way through quality product by
Hmm.
putting my name on the brand, by making the brand very Latino. I mean, our coffee blends are Café Cubano, Buenos Dias, Artesano, um, being what I call unapologetically Latino, right? Putting our presence into the brand and into the product because ultimately it is a product from our countries. If you think about coffee, it grows in Africa, Indonesia,
Uh-huh.
Vietnam,
Yeah.
Latin America, but it gets very whitewashed and rebranded into a very acceptable facade. And I'm trying to kind of challenge that, to be
Can
honest,
you
and
give an
really maintain
example
the.
of this whitewashing and the facade that it gets?
I mean, think of any coffee brand that is big in the U.S. You don't think about the ethnicity of it. You think about the specialty, the craft, and when you think about the visual of the barista or the roaster, you're not thinking about a producer as an artisan. Nobody talks about the art of growing and of processing coffee. They talk about the art of roasting coffee, of
Mm.
preparing an espresso, of creating a brand. They're given the credit in the market, and not that they don't deserve it, but I think we're forgetting the true artisans that we couldn't be where we are without, which is the farmers.
Mm. Okay. Um, of course, obvious question. What is the best coffee? Your coffee, but besides that,
I think it's the one you like. I mean, it's a tough question to answer because
yeah.
I get asked a similar question, which country grows the best coffee?
Mm.
Every country grows great coffee, that grows coffee, that is, but every country that grows coffee also grows terrible coffee, right?
Mm.
It depends on
Yeah, that's like wine
elevation,
in France, I guess.
right? Just because it's from France doesn't mean it's good.
No.
So it's all about terroir and it's all about shade and water treatment, and then it's a question of what matters to you, right? Because for me, organic and regenerative farming practices and treating producers well matters, and that comes into play with how much I value
Mm.
and like a product as well.
Still, if I look at a very commercial organization like Starbucks, or even supermarkets, they brand coffee from an original location. It's Colombian coffee, it's an
Mm-hmm.
Kenyan coffee, it's Guatemalan coffee. That's not so much whitewashing, is it? What am I missing here?
Well, I don't think you're buying it because it's Colombian. I think you're buying it because it's Starbucks. I don't think you're buying, so it's them showing an exotic. To me, it's kind of making our lands exotic, and these brands in the US feeling like they went and found this exotic product,
Hmm.
and through their craft and their intelligence and their skills and their artisanal perfection, they crafted this exotic thing
Hmm.
into something that now deserves their brand. Because you're not buying Colombian coffee, you're buying Starbucks that happens to have Colombian coffee, right? If you think about brand and brand messaging and brand assets,
Hmm.
our countries are used as a way to create this kind of distant land exotic. uh we're the artisans that went out like Indiana Jones and went to the forest and got this coffee for you from these natives,
Uh-huh.
and now we made it this beautiful thing. So we stay removed in the industry. I'll give you an example. I mean,
Yeah.
when I started the business, my company was called Cafe Mayorga. I got into a grocery chain and I was very proud. I went to see our coffee in the grocery chain and I couldn't find it in the coffee aisle. I walked everywhere. I found it in the ethnic section with the tortillas and the beans and the rice and
Hmm.
the ethnic quote unquote products. So I called the buyer and she said, "Well, you're an ethnic product." I said, well, all coffee is ethnic if you want to really
If it
identify it,
if you buy it
right?
in the US, yeah.
Right. I mean, Hawaii is the only place in the U.S. that grows any coffee. So there's this perception that ethnic equals lower grade.
Hmm.
Um, and it was a very real experience for me, right? When I had that experience, I said, wow, like the fact that we're very Latino, I could have the greatest coffee on earth, but there was this presumption that we were not specialty, we were not high quality, we were ethnic. So put it in with the tortillas and the rice and the beans
Hmm.
and the salsa. That's obviously changed over the years, but in the coffee industry, you don't see any culture forward brands. You see concept forward brands.
Hmm.
And I feel like it's my responsibility to protect and celebrate my heritage and culture through coffee, which is a very definitive part of our culture.
Yeah. Yeah. How is coffee grown differently in different parts of the world? Because it's all more or less nested around the equator, but then pretty much all over the world. So
It is.
Vietnamese, Indonesian versus Colombian coffee.
Well, if you think about the big producers, Brazil, Vietnam, that's mass production, that's, mechanized, that's 1,000 hectares per farm. Um, I think when you get into the smaller, more remote areas, you get more indigenous, you get more really small farmers who live on their land. That's what
Hmm.
we try to focus on. So, in Colombia, you're going to have bigger farms because Colombia is a very strong volume growing coffee country with big family estates.
Hmm.
So it's harder to find a small little kind of niche indigenous farmer. We work with a family there, and they then work with their community to form a informal cooperative. So my focus is that it's going to the smaller producers who truly need us, because I feel like in our industry there's also a lot of marketing about poverty and struggling farmers,
Hmm.
but then the support goes to the wealthy state owners. So they use the impoverished farmers for marketing, and then they spend their dollars with the states and the large producers.
On your LinkedIn program, on your LinkedIn profile, you say
Mhm.
we're on a mission to. I'm quoting here. We're on a mission to revolutionize the global agriculture trade. How is that?
Well, I think it's very simple, yet for some reason very hard to figure out why nobody really focuses on this, which is creating relationship-based supply chains. Going to the farm, sitting down with producers, understanding their needs, understanding um, how they get financed, how the market can be leveraged to support them to get um, cheaper interest rates, better supply chain logistics, understanding that if we can work a deal where we partner every year, they don't have to worry about finding a new customer, and we can focus on quality and efficiencies and value.
Hmm.
Um, and really being honest to consumers as well, because in agriculture, there's a lot of marketing. And I think just having very direct relationships where we say, hey, our job is to sell more of our farmers' product and to give something of value to our customers that has great quality. Very simple, really. But I think supply chains are complicated to keep a nice distance between consumer and producer.
Hmm.
And I think marketing fills that void in a way that isn't always genuine.
Where do you grow your coffee?
So we don't grow anything. We're just the roasters. We work with producers between Mexico and Bolivia, never in between. So Latin America exclusively.
Only Latin America.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Which I will always forget. Is this Arabica coffee? Because
Yeah.
I always, and what's the other one again?
Robusta.
Robusta. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we do specialty grade Arabica. It's all specialty grade, organic, shade grown, all the things you hear
Yeah. All the
in
good stuff,
quality.
in other words.
Yeah. All the
Yeah.
quality,
If
which
you,
to me is a given.
Martin, if you say it's so simple, right? This is another quote from, I think comes from your LinkedIn profile. You say, my approach to business is unorthodox, yet
Mhm.
impactful. And but you say it's so simple. And how do you adapt your approach to the different cultures, even if it's only Latin America?
Well, I think I'm already off to a good advantage in speaking Spanish and being familiar with the general cultures, right? We
Yeah.
do have some similarities with, we all like kind of rice and beans and tortilla. And we do have some
Huevos con huevos and
stereotypical.
frijoles con frijoles. Eh?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So, um, but I think I also take what can be a little bit uncomfortable at first, but a more direct approach to really wanting to understand the reality, right? I started this business by moving to Nicaragua and living in Esteli in the back of a cigar factory to just every day learn about what goes on, what
Hmm.
happens in the trading. So, and I really spent the first 10 years of my business being in Latin America, and I'm
Mhm.
back there now living in Costa Rica. So I think it's a matter of understanding, because if you go to the origin side of the business, you can understand things directly from the producer, where most brands rely on importers or exporters or traders or even certifiers who have their own interests in mind, right?
Mhm.
And I think it's just a matter of simple human connection.
Mhm.
And that's why I say it's simple, because it's really caring enough to invest time, money, and energy, being curious enough to learn from the producers.
Mhm.
And it's impactful because we move tens of millions of pounds of product every year.
Mhm. Is there a reason why you only stick to Latin America? Or, I mean, your approach is, from what I hear, is a win-win situation for
Mhm.
yourself, for the producers, and for the end consumer possibly. Why not include Africa and Asia in that?
I used to, and then I realized that my ability to create impact was very limited then because of my language restrictions,
Mhm.
my cultural limitations. I spent a lot of time in Uganda helping form a cooperative between uh, regions that were warring, and then they formed the cooperative to try to bring unity. And frankly, I realized that the issue is so massive that if I wanted to make an impact that I could understand and measure and leave behind past me into my children's generation, I had to narrow down to where I could actually make the biggest impact, which is
Mm.
Latin America. And trust me, that's already a big job,
Yeah, I
leading
can
a huge
imagine.
company, and it's a huge industry.
What percentage of coffee comes from Latin America as opposed to, does that include Brazil? I guess yes, right?
That's the problem. It includes Brazil and Colombia, which are top four growers, and Honduras. I mean, their biggest volume growers are going to be Brazil, Vietnam, Colombia, Honduras.
Hmm.
So you have three of those countries in Latin America, and Brazil skews that massively. So I think overall, Latin America could be over 55%.
Over 50%. Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. What's your biggest challenge with these different cultures and these different, I mean, the chain that comes from, say, the plant to what's in my cup?
I think there's a historical mistrust that has been established for generations,
Between
between producer and buyer. Um, and I think
of
most
the
people,
product of the coffee bean.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's been established through generations from colonization to exploitation that's followed it.
Hmm.
So I think we have to really prove ourselves, right, to our producers, and we have to make commitments and stick to them and overperform for our producers.
And sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt you. You talk about we. Who is we in this case?
Mayorga, our company, our brand. I
Right.
mean, we should be the industry, but the industry has different priorities than we do.
Mm.
Um, so I think the biggest thing is crossing that hurdle of mistrust into, and I've had producers tell me after a few years, like, we couldn't believe, like, through the years what we've gone through together, and you've always done what you say you're going to do.
Mhm.
We saved the cooperative in 2012 from going out of business when there was the coffee rust that wiped out 50% of their harvest. They didn't have enough coffee to pay their debts.
Mm.
We planted chia. We bought that chia. We paid their coffee debts with it. So we are people first, and we will always take care of our coffee producers, ideally through coffee, but if not, through other means.
Mm.
So I think it's the biggest hurdle and challenge is this generational gap between the North and the South of, takers and givers.
Mm.
And we're trying to change this into, it doesn't have to be a zero sum game where one
Right.
wins and the other one loses.
Yeah. Are you, uh, is your brand only sold in the US or outside the US as well?
We're doing some in Canada and Iceland and different small parts of Europe over time. But the US is such a big market that we're pretty
Mm.
busy trying to grow in this market.
Yeah, and it's a relatively easy market. I mean, easy as in it's one language.
Yeah.
The Big Mac is everywhere the same, so that makes it a lot easier
Consumers,
than.
yeah. A lot of consumption in the US too.
That's true. Yeah, yeah. I have to stick to my Nespresso little thingy. So
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say that.
Hey, look, I mean, that's the other thing that I think people have, Nestle does plenty of good. They've made some mistakes,
Hmm.
but I think the premise that big is bad and small is good also is something that the US seems to really lean into. And
Okay.
there's big companies that do good things too. So I never want people to believe that I'm preaching this, support us because, and we're not small, we're more of a medium-sized company.
Hmm.
But I think good is good and bad is bad, and it doesn't have to be whether you're small or big.
Yeah, indeed.
Uh, So I think that's a misconception too that we try to fight against. Because my
Yeah.
goal is to be a big company because I want big impact.
You were okay. Yeah, I like that. People first, like you said.
Exactly.
The whole thing with climate change, etc. Is that influencing where your business will be? Do you, in other words, do you need to adapt to different ways of doing business if this progresses, which I guess it will?
Yes. And I think if you don't believe in climate change, I would recommend you go to a coffee community and ask about how things have changed. I mean, the rainfalls, the timing's off by months.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't come. I mean, the coffee market's reflecting that. I mean, the coffee market's gone up, 80% in the last year and a half. I mean, so yes, we will be in a different place in the future, and the whole industry will. We've been ahead of it I mean, I've been preaching organic since 2000. I've
Hmm.
been in diversified agriculture since 2011, 2012. Um, so I think we'll be okay in our niche. The thing that could hurt us is as more people realize that where we've been for 12, 13 years is where they should have been all along.
Yeah.
Um, but I believe that our model is one that producers favor and we'll always have that alignment with them. So I'm not concerned about supply.
Okay. I'm looking at the clock here, and I like to keep my interviews around 30 minutes, and we're about 30 minutes in the conversation, at least in the recording, that is.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you two last questions, and the one but last question is, can you give us 3 tips to become more culturally competent?
I would say the first one would be if you truly want to be culturally competent, is understand history. Understand the history that has taken countries to where they are today, good and bad. I think a book
Why
which you,
why is that so important?
because it's easy to look at people and say, well, these people are poor and they're crossing the border to come here and create problems and just really kind of lack the understanding of the historical reasons why
Hmm.
uh, people do what they do. I read a book in college called The Open Veins of Latin America that changed my worldview completely. And you understand that the Mayans had more gold than anybody in the world. And when the Spanish came back to conquer them, they took the gold and used that to colonize Latin America. And you start to get an understanding of the historical reasons why countries are where they are and people are who they are. I
Hmm.
think that's important.
Good.
So I think education, I think honest conversation. I think honest conversation with people from different cultures and with everybody. I just believe in open, honest conversation about, you know, we're all humans, right? We all want what's best for our family, for ourselves, for our future. And I think people can dehumanize somebody because they don't look like them or talk like them.
Mm.
And I think having real, honest conversations uh, with everybody is a value that you can see everybody that is a father, a mother, a brother, a sister. We all kind of are trying to live the same life experience through a lot of different elements that are where we were put, right?
Sure.
Um, and I think thirdly is appreciation. I think there's a premise in the US and in most quote developed countries that, it has to be polished and kind of, I don't know, the perception of quality is a little bit different. I
In
perceive
different cultures,
quality
yes.
exactly. So I think a quality tamal to me is, some of the best tamales I've had are like places in like a little drive on the side of the road and it looks
Hmm.
quote dirty but it's amazing, right? Because
Hmm.
so I think understanding the nuances of the appreciation for quality doesn't have to always be polished, and because the polished perception is really something that's been taught to us in these developed countries.
Yeah. Made in Germany.
Exactly.
I find
Exactly.
that an excellent slogan. Actually,
Thank you.
I did buy an automated coffee machine, and I'm not even sure what the brand is. I don't have it anymore. But I looked up where is this from Italy, and then it turned out it's from Germany. Oh, okay, then it's okay.
Then you know it'll be working for a long time based on those
On
presumptions. Yes.
the stamp made in Germany. So
Which is a good stamp, right? But if you buy a car
yeah,
made in Mexico, you might, because of cultural assumptions,
yes,
people might think
absolutely.
twice.
That's why I said, is it Italian? I'll think again.
Exactly.
But if it's from Germany, it must be good. Okay.
Yep.
Anyway, even though that's not the case always, evidently. Last question then, Martin, please. If people want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
My Instagram is martin.mayorga. The company is at Mayorga Coffee. That's probably the easiest way to just connect and see what we do.
Uh-huh.
Or our website is mayorgacoffee.com.
Okay.
And I'm on LinkedIn, like you said. You obviously looked at my LinkedIn profile.
Yeah.
I like to push buttons on LinkedIn and make statements and watch people panic a little bit. So if you want to have fun, you can follow me on LinkedIn.
All right. Okay. One last question, since we're on the topic anyways, is I tried to grow a coffee plant in my house, in my apartment in Belgium. There's a Western European climate, etc. It wasn't very happy.
No, and as you mentioned, you have the coffee belt, right? Which is Tropic
Yeah.
of Cancer, Tropic of Capricorn, and everything in between. So I think you started off with a geographic problem first, right?
Yeah.
Up in Belgium. It doesn't do well with extreme cold. It doesn't do well with extreme fluctuations in temperature.
Mm.
Um, I tried it in Maryland, which is actually probably close to the same as Belgium. So yeah, I mean that's what makes coffee special, right? It's very limited in where we can grow it.
Yeah.
So I wish I had recommendations. I would say move to Costa Rica and come grow coffee Costa Rica with me because it'll grow
It's a
there.
consideration. No, I spent there last this winter 2.5 months in Colombia. So yeah, I
Yeah.
agree with you.
Everything grows in our country. I mean, in Costa Rica we planted cacao just for fun, and my wife called me just 2 days ago. She's like, "We have so much cacao. I don't know what to do with it. It just things grow so well with the volcanic soils that
Yeah, yeah,
it does very
also
well
true.
there." Yeah,
Also true. Also true. All right, Maiten. Thanks so much for your time.
of course,
I'm pretty sure we'll bump into each other in the future.
of course, and I appreciate you having me, and thank you for the time.
My pleasure.